Hey, it's Aaron, and welcome to another installment of the How To Revolution series. The series that really honestly does tell you how to revolution. Now, in the last few episodes, we've talked a lot about how we can go about using certain argumentation tactics to basically spread something known as the Mast Line. Now, we're going to be talking more about the Mast Line today, but that isn't the main focus. It's actually one of many different things that lead to the culmination of something that I've been talking about a lot lately, known as the Hydra theory. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's not unusual because I haven't really explained it to anybody outside of a few people inside of my Discord chat, but it's basically a theory that works along the ideas of if this, then that. It's, as far as I'm concerned, a scientific Marxist theory, or anarchist theory, if you will, that basically talks about how we can achieve a revolution by going about certain tactics to achieve certain goals at certain times. And trust me, I am going to be going in depth into this whole idea within this video series. Now, for the rest of this series, I do suggest that you check out all of the links in the description box below and any of the cards that show up on screen. But with all of that being said, let's get started. Now, we've talked a lot about Sun Tzu's The Art of War on this channel. Specifically in this series, we've talked a lot about the whole idea of know thy enemy like you know thyself. Specifically, the quote goes, "Know thyself, know thy enemy, 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories." Basically, the theory goes, if you know thy enemy like you know thyself, then there's a strong chance that you're going to win 1,000 battles against that enemy because you know how to predict what they are going to do. It kind of goes along with this whole idea that it's better to know someone than to trust someone, because to truly know them means that you would never have to trust anything they do because you kind of know what their actions are going to be. That's one of the main theories that we talk a lot about on this channel, and it's one of the main things that Sun Tzu has always preached. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. Today we're going to talk about an aspect of Sun Tzu's The Art of War that has a lot more to do with the battle aspect and not just the psychological aspects. And that theory today, ladies and gentlemen, is something known as attack what is weak. Now, it seems like a fairly reasonable, fairly obvious idea, attack what is weak, because if you attack what is strong, then you're inevitably going to lose, but it's something that we don't think about in its full context. Now, the way that Sun Tzu talks about it, it basically goes something like this. Should the enemy strengthen its van, he will weaken his rear. Should he strengthen his rear, he will weaken his van. Should he strengthen his left, he will weaken his right. Should he strengthen his right, he will weaken his left. But if he sends reinforcements everywhere, then everywhere he will be weak. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that specific theory at the end of this video, but before that, we're going to talk about the whole idea that I alluded to at the beginning, this whole Hydra theory. Now, I'm going to get it out of the way. First of all, I get it. This Hydra theory already shares a name with the Marvel villains Hydra. Hail Hydra.
Hail Hydra.
And they're basically a Nazi allegory. This has nothing to do with that. This actually has more to do with the mythical beast, the Hydra, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about in a little while here, but I just want to get it out of the way. So get your jokes out. I don't care. Post a bunch of weird random pictures of like multiple headed snakes and shit, but once you're done that, then we're going to talk about the actual theory itself. Now, the theory itself has to do with 3 main points, and within those 3 points, there are several different steps to achieve those points. I'm going to talk about them right now, and then we're going to go in depth into what exactly they entail. Now, point 1 in the Hydra theory is the Mast Line, something that we've talked about a lot on this channel, and what we're going to talk about in a minute as well. Part 2 has to do with building dual power structures. Now, Part 1 and Part 2 can work in tandem with one another and can be achieved at the same time at roughly the same rate, but we have to be working on both of those things so we can achieve Stage 3, which is the Hydra itself, and we'll get right into that, but let's start first with Stage 1. Now, Stage 1 is, like I said, the Mast Line. And if you don't know exactly what the Mast Line is, I talk about it in a lot of other videos, but basically it is the primary method, in fact, the most successful method in history for achieving a workers' revolution. It's the primary method of Marxist revolution that's been used throughout history for the last 100 or so years, and used extremely successfully. Some of the most powerful countries on the face of the earth right now actually used those same methods to gain a revolution in their history to be able to institute a brand new government. Now, a lot of people would argue that certain countries that did use it, such as China and others, ended up using it poorly and used it to create another dictatorship, and you're not going to get any disagreement from me on that one. I'm an anarchist. I don't believe that any governments are necessarily useful, but the Mast Line itself is actually a wonderful idea and extremely useful, specifically when adapted to our modern time frame, when we have this disdain and this mistrust in state structures. We can't use a state or a centralized body to push forth this idea, because the idea that we want to push forth is a worker revolution, and you can't have a worker revolution from the top down. It has to come from the workers. So to do that, we create something known as a decentralized Mast Line. Now, what exactly does that mean? What is a Mast Line? Well, I'll talk about it right now. The Mast Line is a 3-step process that pushes people towards direct action. And in practice, it's actually relatively easy to achieve, and it's something that most of us intuitively do regardless of whether or not we actually know the theory or not. Now, step 1. Spread class consciousness. The idea is to go out and talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers, and talk to anybody else that will listen, so you can actually spread the ideas of socialism. The idea about talking to all of these people is to actually get their input, get their opinions, get all of those heads together so you can eventually come up with solutions to all of their problems. The best thing that you can possibly do when you're going around talking to people in your area, talking to people that are in your friend group or in your workplace, is finding out the grievances that they have with that workplace or with that area. Maybe talking to people about how much they're getting paid and comparing each other's wages, something that capitalists never want you to do, is a great method in showing these people that they have some sort of community and camaraderie and willingness to try to fight for a better wage for everybody. If you get everybody's opinion from that workforce about how the wages are too low or about how they don't have the proper benefits, then you're all of a sudden going to see a lot of people getting motivated and getting angry and getting interested in actually getting involved in changing these sorts of things. And that's great, because that leads us to step 2. Now, step 2 is forming syndicates, affinity groups, and unions. Now, through step 1, you've already talked to all of these people individually and found out all of their problems. You found out that they aren't getting paid enough, or maybe they can't afford their rent. Now what's the process? Now what do you do? Well, now you have to get all of those people together to talk to each other. Because talking one-on-one, yeah, that's better than talking to nobody. Of course, you get a couple of heads together, but talking to people in a larger group, in an affinity group, in a union, in a community, in a tenants union even, is going to get more of those people together and get more heads together so you can think of even better solutions. Those are the steps that are inevitably what you have to go through to gain solidarity with a large number of people. You have to find out what their problems are, and then you have to get them talking to each other. It's pretty straightforward, and it's something that we all have to be doing within our groups. But getting everybody together isn't nearly enough. It doesn't actually achieve the goals that you need to achieve, because you're just kind of commiserating at that point. You have to use the power of the group to collectively bargain for your rights. So not only do you have to get them together, you have to push them towards a specific goal. Now that's where the whole idea of this Mast Line really comes together. You get the masses to march under a line, or a slogan, a banner, that sort of thing. The line itself is basically the marching orders, what's making people motivated to go out there and actually protest. For example, it could be lower the rents. It could be give us higher wages. It could be give us more benefits. It could be make this business into a worker cooperative. All of these lines are wonderful ideas coming from the people, from the ground up, that give these individuals something to fight for, something to march towards. And that's exactly what you need. Just getting a bunch of people together to argue or commiserate about something that's happening in their lives isn't nearly enough. We have to call these people to action. And that's what this is, a call to action. It's a wonderful way to bring together a bunch of people that have shared problems so they can fight towards a common goal. and that's fantastic. But there doesn't have to be one line among all people. There doesn't have to be one specific marching order. There can be many. In fact, it's better if there are many because everybody has different problems, and every community, every city, every household is going to have their own specific problems that they're going to be more motivated to march towards. Some people are going to be extremely angry about the environment, some people about pipelines, some people about jobs, and some people about the mortgage. But we need all of those people together, and at a time when we see this system, the elites, the establishment, all shaken to their core, completely unable to do anything to save or even help their people, now is a better time than ever for us all to get motivated and get engaged in any sort of action that we honestly, truly believe in. But if we have everybody motivated, marching together, all for these different reasons, but for one common goal, to defeat the system or to implement something better, then we are inevitably going to overwhelm this system and create a ton of changes. Now, I'll talk about that in a minute, but before we get into that, we have to talk about dual power structures. Now, I've basically explained to you how Mast Line works. If you want a long-form version of how exactly you can go about achieving a Mast Line, even in your own home while typing on your keyboard, definitely check out the other videos in the description box below and in the annotations at the end of this video. They'll explain to you a lot more about the details of how to achieve a Mast Line. But now that we got the basic structure out of the way, let's talk about building dual power. Now, the idea of dual power structures goes back a very long time, and the basics of it are very simple. It goes something like this. Capitalists and the state are the ones that own all of the means of production. They're the ones that own all of the apparatuses that we need to use to be able to basically live. They own all of the jobs that you need to work at so you can get a paycheck so you can live in a house, and they own all of the houses as well, or at least a vast majority of them. So inevitably, you have to live, work, and die under a capitalist business owner. That's kind of the way this whole thing has been set up. But there's another way. What we could be doing is creating dual power structures, basically taking away the monopoly that these capitalist businesses and magnates and billionaires and millionaires have over all of these resources and giving them back to the people. Now, what exactly does a dual power structure look like? Well, there are many different forms, and just a few of them that come straight off the top of my head are things like worker cooperatives, housing cooperatives, and free stores. Now, as far as all of these different facets are concerned, they can work on many different scales. In fact, they can work on anything from the smallest of groups of 3 to 5 people to the largest of groups of 3 to 500 million people. The reason for this is that if you don't have a single centralized body making all of the decisions for everyone, then you're inevitably going to allow all of the people who have their own individual problems to make decisions to fix all of those individual problems themselves. You see, the old adage that most anarchists talk about is that the people themselves know what the problems are within the world, so they're the best possible individuals to actually go about solving them. The people that are living on your street know how many potholes there are. They know how many alleyways need to be resurfaced or how many fences need to be built. They know how many flowers need to be planted or trees or whatever it is. They're the ones that know best. A lot better than somebody that lives 100 miles or 1,000 miles away in Washington or in Ottawa or something like that have no idea what the exact specific needs are in any one of those communities. So making any one of those communities completely autonomous and able to function on their own as their own governing bodies, a ground-up democracy rather than a top-down authoritative dictatorship, then you immediately have people solving all of these problems that would otherwise be just pushed under the rug or fly completely under the radar. Now, as far as dual power structures go, they can exist in these smaller communities and in larger ones in a lot of different ways. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives can look like a lot of different things. Now, a worker cooperative, for those of you who are uninitiated, is a very simplistic idea that works similar to the way that a business runs today. day. The only major difference is that instead of having a CEO at the top siphoning a bunch of money from all of the purchases that happen within that business right into his own bank account, you take all of that money and you distribute it to all of the workers, because there is no CEO, because the workers are in fact the ones that own the business. Now think about that for a second. If all of the workers own a small part of that business, then they're all going to be more motivated to work harder at that business. And if they work harder at that business, then they inevitably are going to do better in the market. If they do better in the market, then they would achieve or gain more money. And therefore, if none of that money was being funneled up to the top to the CEO and going into their bank account, then that money would be distributed to all of the workers, raising their paychecks. So you see what I'm saying here? Basically, worker cooperatives function to give the workers more money and more benefits. Because if all of the workers are also the owners of the business, they're more likely to give all of the workers themselves more benefits. They're more likely to give them the best possible healthcare. They're more likely to give them the best possible retirement plan, because everybody that works there inevitably wants to have the same thing: a good life. And you can achieve that by instituting something known as a worker cooperative. Now, like I was saying, this can function on a very small scale, and it can function on a very large scale. You can have worker cooperatives that are basically partnerships between 2 or 3 people, and you can also have worker cooperatives that involve thousands of people, hundreds of thousands even, because the way that a worker cooperative functions is from the ground up, inevitably allowing for a lot less direct management of every single one of those small aspects of that company. Now, a worker cooperative functions democratically. It basically gives everybody who owns that business, all of the employees, equal say and an equal vote in what is done with that business. They get to choose what to produce, when to produce, how to produce, and what to do with the profits. And this is a great thing because it allows the employees to always work towards building a better product and not just shipping all of their production overseas. In fact, unless they all wanted to move overseas, they would never ship the business overseas, because that would inevitably mean that they all lost their jobs. And I don't think any worker wants to intentionally lose their own job. Now, worker cooperatives can in fact have bosses, but they are elected democratically through all of the other workers, because in some instances it is useful to have a certain amount of management actually delegating where things go and what people do what jobs at what time and that sort of thing. But that isn't necessarily the only way to do it, and it could also be done by committee. It could also be done by many different ways. Direct democracy, liquid democracy, vote weighing, ranked choice voting. There are a lot of different ways that we could go about structuring a business that has absolutely nothing to do with the top-down hierarchical fashion that we are setting things up right now under, that closely resemble feudalistic dictatorships, where you have a king dictating to all of the serfs how to live their lives. Just replace king with boss and serfs with employees, and you have essentially the same system. Now, worker cooperatives could be factories, they could be production facilities, they could even be teams of tradesmen working together and sharing their individual talents and working towards building a specific building or house or whatever it is. It could also be a farming cooperative where a bunch of different people use the exact same equipment so they can work a bunch of different farms all at once. All of these different facets all work under the same umbrella of a worker cooperative, and they're fantastic for actually getting the workers the benefits that they need and allowing to build that dual power structure, because a worker cooperative is in and of itself essentially a microcosm of communism, of anarchism if you do it properly. And that's a wonderful thing, because the workers need to have as much authority and control over their lives as we can possibly give them, because that's the kind of world that we want to build out of the rubble that is this world. Now, housing cooperatives are very similar to the idea of a worker cooperative, except for instead of having a bunch of different people owning the business, you have a bunch of different people owning property, or owning a bunch of different houses, or even one house, or even a complex. That way, they can all share in the mortgage instead of having to rent off of one person that owns the building. Housing cooperatives are a great way for you to be able to live a lot cheaper lifestyle rather than giving all of your rent money to a landlord, because eventually you will pay off that house. And all of you will benefit in that, because then you no longer have to pay those rents. You'd all share in a couple of dollars a month property taxes, or a couple of dollars in upkeep of the building. But outside of that, you're all working together to make sure that this house is a home, and make sure that all of you are paying as little as possible to live the best possible lives. Another example of building dual power structures is something known as a free store. A free store exists in many different economic forms, but the one that I talk about the most is basically the idea of a gift economy. Now, in anarchism, a gift economy basically functions the same way that our economy functions right now, only eliminating money. Think about it this way. Right now, we don't actually need to have money at all. Really, what we should be doing is waking up in the morning, going to work, working for 5 or 6 hours, whatever it is, a few days a week, and producing all of the goods, services, and things that we need within the system to be able to survive. Then at the end of the day, we go to the grocery store, or we go to any number of little shops or whatever, and buy the things that we want or need to survive. And none of that necessitates us having to spend any money. Of course, you might have to swipe some sort of card that allows the stores to know that these items are being taken away and that they need to produce more. Or in some instances, such as a global pandemic, where you only have a certain number of resources that can actually go out to people, instead of having everybody just rush into the store and get everything that they want based on how much money they have, those resources can be allocated to the people that actually need them the most. Like a family of 4 with only one parent taking care of everybody is going to get a lot more goods than one individual billionaire that could just as easily take all of the masks, all of the gowns, and all of the fucking toilet paper for themselves if they so wanted to. That way we can actually divide up the goods that people need in a society properly in a way that benefits everybody and not just a select few. And if you think about it, there's really no reason why we couldn't have something like that as we speak. I mean, the only thing that money does at this point, and we've seen this over and over and over again throughout the course of history, is it stops people from being able to gain the things that they need to live. It's like putting a barrier in front of every single person that doesn't make over $50,000 a year and saying, no, I'm sorry, now you're going to have to choose whether or not you get to eat or live in a house. And that's not a fair choice for anybody to have to make. We have enough houses in the entire country, specifically in the United States, to house every single homeless person. There are enough goods and services and items and food on the entire world right now to feed and clothe and house every single person, but we just don't do it because it isn't cost effective. Inevitably, capitalism leads to a death cult. It leads to a situation where some people have and some people have not. And the have-nots never end up getting out of that position. No matter how many generations there is inevitably going to always be an upper class and a lower class, because that's what capitalism breeds. And without that, capitalism doesn't really work. You have to have the people at the top that own and control all of the means of production, and the people at the bottom that work for them, so you can actually create the system that we live under at the moment. The only time that you actually get to have economic freedom or any kind of stability in your life is if you make over a certain number of dollars a year. Without that, you can't go on vacations, you can't go on trips, you can't do certain things like, I don't know, chase after a dream, because if you do anything that could somehow, in some way, even just shake the foundation that you are living under this capitalist system, then you will inevitably lose everything and end up in the poorhouse. So free stores work really well in context of a gift economy, and like I said, each one of these systems are able to work on small scale as well as large scale. So within a gift economy, if you're going to have a free store, specifically one in a small community, it's useful if that small community is self-reliant, if they have energy independence, if they are basically able to produce a lot of the commodities that they are then giving out to the people within that community, then they won't have to rely so heavily on exterior communities to support them. That isn't to say that they aren't going to have to do trade with other communities. Certain industries and certain communities are going to be very good at producing certain goods or certain services, whereas others aren't. So obviously a certain amount of trade is going to have to exist between communities, but being able to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, self-sustaining, is extremely important whenever you're trying to create something like this. And that really does help your local community, because instead of having the grocery store 20 miles away in the outskirts of town, where they're able to build a giant box store like a Walmart or whatever, you can have small independent stores all throughout your community that you can go to and get all of the things that you need. Very similar to what we used to have known as a town square, except for each individual geographic community would be able to set up their own town square. And when you've created a system like that, you inevitably have created something known as counter-economics, a black or a gray market, something that doesn't exist solely within the white markets of capitalism. That's basically what a lot of anarcho-capitalists actually talk about when they're talking about instituting some sort of counter-economy of some kind. Usually they're talking about a black market or a gray market. This is a similar idea, only it's communistic in that people are sharing in all of the different resources instead of relying on the capitalist industry or the market itself to give them the things that they need. There are also a lot of other things that exist within dual power structures that I'm not talking about here. Some of the things that many different socialist countries have implemented while they were in the middle of their revolution have been things like the People's War or other community defense programs that usually involve arming a whole lot of people. Now, like I say all of the time in any of my videos, I do not condemn or condone any of those actions, but that is something that they've done a lot in the past. Now, once these dual power structures have been created, once you have things like worker cooperatives and housing cooperatives and free stores and energy independence and all of these things, you're going to want to have them be able to communicate with one another. So you're going to want to set up some sort of representative councils. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to elect one individual to represent everybody like a politician, but it does kind of mean that you would want to have a few people, if not a small council of individuals that are rotated through or elected in a position where they can communicate with other officials or with other delegates or with other representatives from all of these other dual power structures, and they can actually work together to achieve certain goals. You're going to want to have these unions unified as larger unions. That's one of the main ideas behind having not just affinity groups, which are small groups of people working together to achieve a specific goal. You also have clusters, which are groups of affinity groups that are working together to achieve a specific outcome. Usually that outcome is attacking the system in a certain way, preferably capitalism, but also the hierarchical structures as well. And not only is that a tactic that works on the small scale when you're dealing with just specific direct actions, but it also works on the larger scale too when we're talking about radical syndicalism of all sorts of different communities. We have to have a way of all of those different communities to communicate with one another, and to do that you can, like I said, organize small councils of representatives that get together with the larger group of individuals, and they're able to communicate what the workers at the bottom want. That way, you don't have a politician dictating to everybody what they want from society, but you have everybody working together from the bottom up to tell the politicians, or the representatives in this case, what they want to have happen. It all has to do with the ideas of only having justified hierarchies and having all of your government coming from the bottom up, from the people up, and not from the top down. Like I've said before, having a top-down hierarchical structure is inevitably going to be authoritarian and lead to more problems, whereas having a bottom-up government of the people is something that we can actually use to achieve real success. So now all of these things that I've been talking about so far are working together. Step 1, getting together all of these affinity groups and unions and so forth so you can march towards a line, doing the whole Mast Line activity. Step 2, setting up all of these dual power structures and making sure that they're all organized and working with one another to achieve specific results. And step 3 is something that follows from all of that. Remember that quote that I told you at the very beginning of this video, that thing that I was talking about from Sun Tzu? You remember, the whole idea of always attacking your enemies at their weakest points? Well, what we've essentially done here is we've spread out our enemy's defenses in every different direction. Every time we come up with another one of these affinity groups or have another line demonstration or organize another dual power structure system, we inevitably spread out all of the resources that the state would usually use to dismantle and squash any one of those individual activities. If all of this is happening all at once, it inevitably weakens the system and allows for us to actually implement the things that need to be implemented to save people's lives. Should the enemy strengthen his van, he will weaken his rear. Should he strengthen his rear, he will weaken his van. Should he strengthen his left, he will weaken his right. If he strengthens his right, he will weaken his left. And if he sends reinforcements everywhere, he will be weak everywhere, just like Sun Tzu had said. And it just so happens that if you have all of these activities happening all at once, if you have all of these people using direct action to bubble up the system and to spread out these resources, then you inevitably create a situation where the state just cannot compete. And even if they're able to take down one of those specific organizations, inevitably, from the ashes of that organization, several more will appear, like a hydra. See, the Hydra was like a dragon with many heads, and every single time one of those heads got lopped off, 2 or 3 more would grow in its place. And that's inevitably what would happen here. Every time one of these dual power structures is taken out, 2 more are erected in its place. Every time 1 or 2 of these unions or affinity groups are destroyed or dismantled, several more erupt in their place. Because that's the natural way of things. When people are finally seeing that all of these different methods are working and it's actually helping the people, they're inevitably going to want to continue to help the people because they themselves are the people and they want help. That's the way that we do this. That's the way that we achieve a real revolution, showing the people that we can actually help one another and do things that can save our lives. So what exactly is the Hydra theory? Well, it's pretty simple. Like I said, it's an if this, then that. If you're able to achieve the Mast Line and able to build dual power structures, you inevitably will overwhelm the system with direct action. When you overwhelm the system with direct action, you're spreading out the resources that the system has in all different directions, making it completely impossible for that system to adequately respond and to stop you. And while doing all of that, you're actually offering them a real alternative to all of these power structures. It's not going to be easy, it's going to be extremely difficult, and it's going to take a long time. We can't just do this overnight. We have to be working every single day to make people understand class consciousness, to get people involved in union groups, to actually get them motivated to march for things that will help, to get them to join in on worker cooperatives and housing cooperatives and build dual power structures. I didn't even talk about community gardens and those sorts of things. We have to be working every single day to achieve these things now. Right now, the material conditions for a real revolution are so perfectly put in place that if we miss this opportunity, I don't think that we're going to have another one quite like it. It's up to us. It's up to you and me to save us. And we have to act right now because it doesn't matter whether or not we want it to crash or not. The system is literally falling apart. And if we don't offer some sort of solution, some sort of resolution, some sort of counter economy to put in its place, then inevitably the fascists will. And they'll take that microphone and they will convince a lot of people that the only way out of this is to have them lead. And that will inevitably lead us to destruction. At least that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out all of the links in the description box below. Check out all the annotations that are in front of the screen right now and watch all of the other videos that are within this series. And make sure also to hit that little bell button Not just once, but twice, or however many times it takes, because you have to hit it a bunch of fucking times, apparently, to actually get notifications that I'm putting out a video. So do that, and to everybody out there, solidarity, comrades. It's time for a revolution.